Welcome to any audience listening to this or watching this phenomenal conversation. This is phenomenal conversation number 30, Healing the Heart of Regeneration. I'm going to be doing a co-interview, or we'll be doing a co-interview with Katherine Long. We're going to more or less interrogate or explore the same questions together. And once that's over, I'll stop the recording and we'll go back into the live conversation with the whole group. So welcome, Katherine. And can you share a little bit, a synopsis of how you came to be interested in healing and regenerative change? And from talking to you before, and even the way you led the meditation, there's something that's so central about healing to regeneration. They're almost inextricably linked to each other. So I'd love to hear how you've bonded those two things, but if you can tell us the story of how you got there to begin with.
Okay, I'll try and keep it short.
Okay.
Look, for take 35 minutes, just talking about that. Briefly, I think one of the key things that I would point to in terms of my own journey was a realization I had, and it must be almost 20 years ago. So I'd flown to Seoul in Korea to attend a conference, and I didn't know anybody there, and traveling over there, I was feeling a little bit kind of despondent as to, like, why am I going on this long haul flight, etc., etc. But when I was there, I had this realization: why do I feel like I can be myself here and not in the UK? And it really brought back to me something that's kind of obvious when you look from the outside. But I was born and grew up in Japan. And in Japanese culture, the idea that all living things and beyond living things, that includes rocks, minerals, etc., all natural phenomenon, has its own consciousness. And I think even though I was brought up in a, kind of church-based setting and that kind of thing, it can't help but to infiltrate and infuse your consciousness, right? So there's something about that way of knowing that was so innate and inherent for me that I was struggling to understand, why do I feel a disconnect in UK culture? And I think having that realization and realizing that actually I just naturally think of things in terms of living systems, and in that way, then of course, as I encountered different people, different thought leaders who have kind of been pioneering in this space and connecting to the language. So Giles Hutchins and I connected quite a long time ago, and we, exchanged thoughts, ideas, did some bits of work together, and so it's kind of then evolved. But I think it was something, like for many of us, it's just an innate thing that we find a language for, and then we figure out how to bring it more powerfully into our work. So I don't know, Dave, you maybe have a similar experience in, probably a different way, but maybe something that was quite inherent for you, or was it different?
Well, my first paid job was as a mental health nurse. So I was drawn towards care and healing in the classical form, as it were. And then I spent 30 years working in the social sector, working with youth and young adults that had a lot of problems. So I was drawn, I think I have a kind of caring heart, and I was drawn to help those that were in deep distress. So I have a very practical, hands-on experience of the social systems of trying to deal with deep distress. They don't deal with minor distress, they deal with deep and painful distress. So wasn't so much through a spiritual insight. It wasn't so much through kind of non-dual animistic perspective that you woke up to in the East. But I'm drawn to this work around regenerative because I do feel the world is fractured and fracturing. not only in the social systems, but all systems are under pressure. And I think regenerative implicitly means something about restoring, reviving, recuperating the planet. And I feel the planet's pain on that the pain and harm that we've done to the planet. I feel that on a visceral level, and it's part of what motivates me to not retire and keep going. And also, having done years of spiritual work, there's something very intuitive about how the nature of life that you come in touch with if you do a lot of spiritual exploration. And I think a couple of people were referring to it in their introductions. The kind of essence of life, I do feel, is essentially generative or regenerative. And that despite everything, I do feel that there, like Samantha was saying, there are pockets that we can give our energy to and attention to, and we can't underestimate the power of attention, of giving attention to that which promotes growth and life. So part of that's partly what I'm doing with Phenomenal Conversations. So I think I could follow then by your, so you had this link to natural systems and the intrinsic energy and consciousness that drives everything and all matter. So how did healing come into that as part of your journey? How did healing become like center to your work?
So I think that was an evolution, and I hear what various people have said. Certainly, it's not the first time I've heard that healing can be quite a challenging, provocative word for people, and that's why I choose to use it. So, because I think it helps us to really think about a lot of the kind of core embedded assumptions that we have, even our negative experiences of that word. So I suppose part of my journey was recognizing that when we're working in regeneration, we are working largely, I think, in degenerated places. Otherwise we don't need the regeneration, right? So there's something about going to the margins, going to the places that may be broken, or it may be, as I think Samantha said, it's like being able to spot, well, actually there are some green shoots, so how do we give that some nourishment? So there's this kind of thing of like always working kind of a little bit marginally, I feel, is part of the work, and that's where we encounter difference, we encounter diversity. And for me, healing, if we go to its proper meaning, is not about some reset button.
Okay.
Healing is always evolutionary. It's always supposed to help us to integrate some learning. At some level. So, and we see that in nature as well, that there's a kind of a memory held within, whether it's a degraded forest or soils, or the soil that goes kind of around a river basin has this memory. And so I think that when we're working regeneratively, we're sort of working with what's the deep memory of this system that knows what health is. So healing really means holing. And not in a static way, not of like, okay, now we just reach wholeness and that's it, because of course it's always changing. It may be, and that's where I think what you brought in earlier, Caroline, around is it broken or is it just change? Well, of course it's a continuum, and the word broken, I choose not to use words like that. Partly because for me it sort of has this mechanical implication, and for me healing is always about complex adaptive systems adapting to the new context, adapting to the new environment, which isn't that what we're doing? Helping systems to find a new level of wholeness. So Davey, you were bringing in the organizational aspect, and sort of like, so how do we help teams in organization find their next level of wholeness. And it won't stay forever and ever. Of course, things change and move on. But the capacity, being able to tap into the capacity for healing, because we understand how enough principles about how it works, is then that's the kind of regenerative capacity. Of course, I'm a bit biased, but and Dave, you're talking about working in social, kind of mental health care and stuff. It's often when we encounter broken services that are trying to heal that we then go deeper and think, what is it really? Because I went on a journey looking at different modalities of healing, and they were all speaking different languages, and there was a kind of I would say an ego attachment to being the right way. Yeah. Like this is the right way, or this methodology, and of course it misses the point, because modalities are just different pathways. They're just different ways that healing expresses itself. But the healing itself, so sorry, just to kind of finish that thought, was seeing that actually the way that we think about and language healing is itself broken.
Right. Okay.
It's self-fragmented.
Yeah.
And then when we realize healing is healing, there's not a different healing for deep, profound spiritual pain than there is for if I cut my hand.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the same processes are at work. Yeah. And so it's just at a different level of materiality or consciousness.
Well, I think that reminds me of a couple of things that around with Native American wisdom, something like medicine doesn't mean what we mean by medicine. So there's a whole use of medicine and things that are medicinal, I think, intrinsically good for the soul. And it's about remembering. Healing is about remembering. Like you were saying, there's this layer of memory in systems of wholeness. So, and I think some of the best ancient technologies towards wholeness encourage the body or the system to develop its own healing. It's, it doesn't need an injection every 20 minutes. It needs, needs the kind of encouragement and the circumstances where it can heal itself. Please respond. Yeah.
I was going to say all healing ultimately is self-healing.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's something that really complex that happens where, you can say, well, is healing all self-healing? That sounds like it's very individualistic and it's just up to the individual or whatever it is. And what about external inputs that are important? Well, if my healing requires me to have a certain diet, let's say, I'm already in relationship with the nutrition that I'm now bigger than my own body system.
Yeah.
That's part of the whole system. And this whole system needs to heal. For me to heal, the food system needs to heal as well, right? So we're on a journey together. And I think this is where this idea of kind of, so I believe self-healing principles. And I believe that as soon as we engage with our own self-healing, it becomes part of a bigger self-healing. Does that make sense?
Well, I just push back on that, not because I don't believe it, but just to explore it a little bit more, is because the notion of healing you're proposing, because, you could say a critique of some of the reflective inward practices are a kind of an self-indulgence because they don't have the social or wider systemic, macro-systemic impacts. So what is it that you're saying that distinguishes that from a kind of, for example, you can, I've done it before, you can lose yourself in spirituality to avoid the reality. So you can use these things in a way that is unhealthy. So what is it that you're pointing to that is different to a kind of an avoidance?
Gosh, it's really hard to put it into precise language. I'm not quite sure I'll be able to do it, but I just feel as though so there's some if we basically understand that reality is constructed fractally.
Yeah.
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 That we are not kind of hermetically sealed separate individuals. So let's say, this is an example I give. Let's say there's two people, one and they both have cancer. Okay, sorry if this triggers anybody, but we'll just use that as an example. So one person gets a cure, but they may not heal.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
they might, it might put them into remission or this, but there might not be any healing process that actually goes on for them. It's just something that's being done to them. And another person who may equally not do well, and they may find that they are in their last days, but they are healing. Maybe they repair relationships with their family members. Maybe they're at peace with themselves. And that healing ripples. So
Right.
fractal, right? It's going to ripple throughout the whole community because they're going to remember that this person had this impact on their lives, or that they came, they were at peace with their family, or they reconciled themselves. So I think something about healing always has a generative kind of ripple effect, that we don't get to say, I just want to heal this, but that's not so much.
Okay.
Right? It's like we don't, the healing kind of jumps.
Yeah.
Jumps from one system to another.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And also that conceivably you could still be unwell, but be more, have healed the system around you. You may
Yes.
not technically have recovered or be
Yeah.
better, but because you've changed in some way and changed what's around you and how you relate to people, you can embody healing in that way. So I'm going to just shift we've talked about, the recuperative power of systems and self-healing, but at the beginning when you were talking about natural systems having a memory, I would propose that's a memory of wholeness or health or of thrivability. So what's your insight on the connection between healing and wholeness, or regenerative healing and wholeness? How are they in bed or complementary or totally linked with each other?
So I appreciate that we are diving into all sorts of different concepts here. But, so there's something about that wholeness. I'd like to call it a wholing.
A wholing, okay.
A wholing. Let's call it that, because it's not just a static process, it's a dynamic process. As we said, one wholing prompts another wholing kind of thing. So and the kind of deep memory of wholeness is embodied within us, so and I guess part of this process, and why it feels so relevant to regeneration as well, is the evolutionary purpose of healing. That it's not just the reset button, but it's like, how do we integrate? So how is it that we've evolved through all this amount of time? Because we've managed to integrate the knowledge from our ancestors and from other species and all sorts of things into how we are now. And I think that is, at a societal and planetary level, if we want to look at the purpose of dealing with our brokenness, is so that we can collectively evolve. And that that may be disruptive as well. I don't think healing is just this kind of soft therapeutic thing that we just kind of wake up one day and suddenly we're whole. Often it requires disruption and is disruptive as a process itself. That we talked earlier about, to what extent do we also then go into the trauma space and deal with that. So I don't know if that's what you like to touch on.
Maybe next, but I think I'd kind of like to refer back to this allergy that Caroline expressed about healing, and she expressed a kind of appreciation of wholeness and sort of chicken and egg situation. And I think partly when you're talking about holing, you're alluding to the fact that we're already whole, we're already complete, and that at a deeper level, if you think of atoms, molecules, protons, neutrons, cells, organs, tissues, these are all small holes that make up larger holes. And that larger whole, and at a meta level of complexity, emerges in the evolutionary process as human beings. So we wouldn't have emerged without a massive degree of already holing and wholeness, because that's the way that nature emerges, and that's our nature is also implicit. And I think when Samantha was mentioning the story of separation, our kind of the Enlightenment and scientific revolution has divorced us from some inner appreciation of what that wholeness is and our own interior connection to the universe. So when I'm talking about holing, I'm also trying to include perceptions of time, of energy, of the evolution of the universe, of the end of the universe, a kind of an expansive evolutionary spectrum of wholeness that
bring it on.
So much more of the human experience than we tend to allow ourselves to perceive and conceive. So yes, seem to hit something there for you, Katherine.
And I love what you're bringing in there, that reminder that we already are whole, and yet I also want to name that parts of ourselves become inaccessible to ourselves as well, right? So people talk about kind of soul retrieval as needing to kind of almost bring back those fragmented parts of self that perhaps been split off through trauma. So at one level, yes, we are whole, but we have become numbed or through different flight, fight, fright responses, they're not available to us the way that we would like to be able to access them.
Well, maybe that brings us on to the idea of trauma, because we've had a pre-discussion about that. So there is a sort of necessity for the regenerative practitioner to be working on their own healing. I'm not disavowing that. I'm also not abnegating or avoiding the fact there is real trauma. I've worked with real trauma. I've worked with kids that had real trauma. I've experienced my own trauma. So I'm not dismissing that. But prevalent in today's more progressive circles that are interested, there's a big emphasis on healing from trauma and collective trauma. And I think it'd be quite interesting to hear your thoughts on that strand of kind of in the, what's it called, the in-between world, as it were. A lot of people are exploring and feeling that's a necessary prerequisite of healing and healing collective trauma to be regenerative. So what are your thoughts on that? Liminal space, that's the word.
Gosh. Well, I can speak from just personal experience, personal views, okay? So and each of us has to come to our own conclusions. What I observe in the trauma-informed space is that the focus is on trauma and almost creating trauma as an identity. So if you want to trap people in their dis-ease, that's a great way to do it if we're not careful, right? So I think there's a way that we tread carefully with that, because we can help create narratives that trap people. Eckhart Tolle spoke about the pain body as a kind of individual / collective trauma that requires feeding. So
Yeah.
what do? We keep feeding it because it builds up our victim identity or our trauma identity. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And so anybody who's worked through that knows that can become quite a trap. We have to somehow figure out how to free ourselves from that.
Yeah.
We can also end up, if we become over-invested in, I think, a trauma-based way of thinking. Paul Levi and others have spoken about the wetiko, kind of, it's where we see everything wrong with everybody else, and we get very angry and because we can't see it in ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think there's something about when we anchor our energy and tether our focus towards healing as an energy. And that's why I did the meditation at the beginning, because I think ultimately it's energetically experienced. We can call this talking, but actually when we start to connect to the beautiful cymatics, let's say, of healing, then it's an experiential thing, and we're bringing our focus and awareness into this hidden wholeness rather than constantly anchoring ourselves back into the trauma. So it's not like we shouldn't be talking about trauma, but let's be careful how we do that.
Well, that reminds me of this fame. I don't know where Otto Scharmer got it from, but I heard it from him, is where attention goes, energy flows.
Yeah.
So if there's a kind of, depending on what the intention is behind giving attention there, it can be healing or not. And I also have similar reservations from a slightly different angle, because I've been I know how traumatizing society can be from my own experience, but also from the experience of youth and young adolescents. I was very passionate about setting their circumstances right. But relatively speaking to the rest of the world, that are maybe living on $1 a day for, I don't know how many it is these days, 60 or 80%. Us in the West that are privileged or westernized lifestyles have immense privileges, immense good fortune, immense freedom. We have apps catering to our every whim. We're probably more embedded and enwombed in luxury than anyone else that has come before us. So I often find, not that I don't think that trauma is legitimate and self-healing is legitimate, but I often find the privilege of having a Western lifestyle and being grateful for it would be healing in and of itself. If there was sufficient gratitude and gratitude was practiced, there's intrinsic healing in that maybe, years of therapy or whatever modality one's entering into might not correct. So I'm not saying, like I'm saying, I've been traumatized. I never availed myself of anything healing, but I healed through sharing my gifts and through giving that to the world, to young people. So I healed in that way. But I just think there's just not enough balance in some spaces and not enough perspective on the immense wealth and carbon consumption that we benefit from in westernized societies. So I think we're sort of reaching the end, but we promised in my communications about it to talk about, I think we've covered learning from nature quite a bit, but I'm quite interested in your thoughts, if you're okay, to switch to community because of the story of separation that was mentioned. And the fact that we're atomized, fragmented, and alienated from one another as humans, what's your thoughts on the healing power of community and the necessity of community to be kind of the pulsing heart of regeneration, or whether you agree or not with that proposition?
So community is an interesting word.
Yeah.
And I think somebody mentioned doing kind of place-based work.
Yeah.
And if you're doing place-based work, you work with what's there, and that is the community that you're working with. And I think where we've got to is we're in a place where we pick and choose the communities that we want to be part of. So I think one of the challenges that we have, particularly, well, or in as much in regenerative spaces as anywhere else, is that we may not be getting the diversity of lived experience and perspectives and etc. That actually when we're working regeneratively, you don't get to say, oh, these people, they're regenerative, they get it, so we just work with them. It's actually, that's not really how life works, you know. So so when we're talking about healing in community, I want to kind of bring in the sense of learning with humility from difference.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. And recognizing that that there's another dimension to that, which is like when we go back to, you know, even just a few generations ago, it was the community that was often responsible for the health of each other. At a basic level, you know, are you being fed enough? Or, you know, somebody who's got midwifery skills can come around, or somebody, you know, can look after a sick child or something like that. And so the healing at a very visceral, basic level was shared in community. And I wonder whether we are vulnerable enough to make our needs known. That how would you know who might need some help, you know? And I think there's something almost that needs to be, I learned a beautiful expression. Can I share it?
Yeah, please do. Please do.
It's called quorum sensing.
Okay.
And it relates to bacterial communities, so like gut bacteria or soil bacteria, and it's sensing into what do we got too much of, what do we not have enough of, how do we respond, you know, how do we get that kind of homeostasis, you know, kind of managing ourselves in relation to what's in our environment. So that there's something also which is absolutely core to any healing, is to be able to see and sense yourself, right, as a community. And I wonder whether, you know, speaking perhaps more specifically to the regen community, that we're still learning to undress in front of each other, right, and kind of be naked.
I think in the earlier call we had with Jenny, she talked about the kind of space that we're in now is the kind of space of, you know, regenerative confluence and alignment. When you're in the bridge world or the degenerative system, as you were talking about, a lot more of the tensions that are existing come into play. And that's partly what I think you're speaking to in terms of managing to listen and learn with humility in unlike communities, or communities that think differently, behave differently, but also have different values and views of reality, and to being able to encompass those. So,
absolutely. And there's a healing implicit in just being able to do that, right?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I think is there any last words you want to have or say on what we've talked about, Katherine, before we close?
All I can say is it feels as though, you know, we've covered vast territory, and I suppose what I want to offer everyone on this call and anybody who's going to be listening is this topic touches on so many different areas of life. And so just doing the sense making that's valuable to you, and not getting hung up on this word or that word or this concept or that concept, and actually just bringing it back to ourselves, you know, that's what life wants for us, I think. So
Oh, that's gorgeous. And I think we'll end on that note. Thanks so much. So I'm just going to end the recording.